Hey everyone, welcome to Neighbor Science, the only podcast about political economy and anime. I'm Ryan Salisbury.
I'm Chris Nivens.
Today we have Yungneocon.
Yeah, hi. What's up?
So today we are here to talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe of economics books. It is the most popular by far. It has 30 different editions. It takes place in a semi-realistic fantasy universe and ages ever worse as time goes on. And what the hell, it's probably owned by Disney.
Probably.
I'm talking about Freakonomics and Super Freakonomics. So I started reading these books like a month and a half ago. I posted on Twitter that I was reading them, and Young asked me to come on the show because he wanted to talk about it as well.
I mean, I just like to take any chance I can to, like, A, talk about economics, and then B, dunk on it.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, Freakonomics is very funny, but yeah, anyway, continue the intro.
Yeah. So it was written by Stephen Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner in 2005 originally, and it was extremely popular. It sold over 4 million copies. It had several editions through like 2009, and then the sequel was Super Freakonomics, which we'll also be talking about. And they are just awful books. They're really fucking bad. Like, some of the parts are somewhat interesting because he's, like, you know, talking about things that happen in real life. But the economics parts, I'm not even really sure what they're supposed to be because there's really very little economics in the book at all.
Yeah, it's just not very. It's so personally subjective to like whatever the fuck these guys find is like kind of semi-contrarian, and
Yeah,
it's very.
there's a lot of like
Hickory,
here's what my friends at Harvard are researching.
right.
That's like 90% of the content. It's like, I have a friend at Harvard, and this is his research, and somehow this has to do with economics.
Yeah, I've always found that sort of style very unnerving. That's why I don't like popular press books, but it's just, like, I don't know, it's funny because I'm just doing this thread, you know, on the toilet about the vape ban and all this stuff, and I was talking about all this like highfalutin abstract economic theory stuff.
Molan Vape, by the way.
That should be our, yeah, we'll get tattoos of it like those guys. But it's like I was talking about all this stuff like incentive compatibility, which is actually like superficially very similar to the stuff he talks about in Freakonomics, which is funny because it's independent. But the way he talks about it is just totally just like bland. It's substanceless, and also he's like full of shit. I have a couple papers,
Yes.
couple papers as I wont to have that discuss Levitt and Dubner. So, for example, I'm sending you right now. It's a review of the criminal deterrence literature, and his claims are specifically addressed in it.
Okay.
It's from I don't know if you got to the part where he talks about how basically the eugenics part, but anyway, we'll get there.
Yeah, no, I read all of both books, unfortunately. I did skim parts of the second one, but
Yeah, I love to write pop economics books with a eugenics section, just for mass consumption. No big deal.
I was about to say, like, the whole thing in general is just like really insanely casually racist.
Yes.
Like,
very,
the first book especially, there's so many N-bombs in it.
Well, and it's funny too because he tries to figure himself as being like against racism. So he talks has the whole name discrimination section, which is funny because he actually talks about some valid results in that section, but then just totally elides like what he's taught. Like I forget even what his. I don't think he even provides a solution. I don't remember.
He repeatedly points out problems that are like innate to capitalism that cannot possibly be solved within capitalism, and then just moves on.
It's kind of like Buddhist, right? It's like you just got to learn to accept it's to teach you to understand the like nature of the illusion and to accept it.
The economy is suffering.
Right, exactly. There's no path out of the cycle of supply and demand, or whatever.
Right. It's Buddhist capitalist, or like capitalism explained with like a Buddhist disposition, but in the style of Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Well, it's funny. It's like, this is just tangential, but totally tangential. But there's like funny thing of like during World War II, there were quite a few Buddhists in Japan who actually became shills for the authority. Like, so they would do these things. They would write these things where they would be like, when you shoot an innocent Chinese farmer, do not like despair, because you are not doing it for the universe is working through you, and the bullet is merely flowing from you, right. and is re-entering them into the cycle of reincarnation. So no biggie or whatever. And it's it's funny because it feels very much like that. It's like it's sort of just like don't worry, be happy, life is terrible.
Right.
Bullshit. It's what is kind of that's what the public persona of economics is, at least.
Yeah. It's very resonant with the kind of the Christian right and their tendency to kind of just be like, oh well, there's so much suffering in the world, so thoughts and prayers, and just be as white as possible.
And suffering is only ever a cudgel for them. So they'll be like, these privileged liberal leftists or whatever. But it's funny because it's just like, okay, well, if your conception of them is as like privileged Hollywood or whatever it is, elites, then why aren't you opposed to the existence of said elitism? But it's just like, no, it's just a selective usage of the idea. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry for the popping noise. I was opening a drink.
So apparently he won the Patrick Bateman Clark Medal of economic achievement, which has some illustrious names like Paul Krugman and Lawrence Summers, two of my favorite guys right there.
John Bates Clark Medal is with the Fama Award and the Nobel Prize, like the three biggest prizes in economics.
Yeah. Oh, Milton Friedman also got it, and Paul Samuelson.
It's all Chicago people.
Lots of great guys.
It's all the people who shop at the bookstore I was just at. It's kind of funny, actually.
Doxing yourself here.
Okay, so let's start with the very beginning, the preface to Freakonomics. So I'm just going to read this because it's insane. Levitt had an interview for the Society of Fellows for the Venerable Intellectual Clubhouse at Harvard. The Venerable Intellectual Clubhouse at Harvard that pays young scholars to do their own work for 3 years with no commitments. Levitt felt he didn't stand a chance. For starters, he didn't consider himself an intellectual, but he does now. He would be interviewed over dinner by the Senior Fellows, a collection of world-renowned philosophers, scientists, and historians. I wonder if Epstein was there.
Yeah, right. He provided the entertainment.
He worried he wouldn't have enough conversation to last even the first course. Disquietingly, one of the Senior Fellows said to Levitt, "I'm having a hard time seeing the unifying theme of your work. Could you explain it?" Levitt was stymied. He had no idea what his unifying theme was, or if he even had one. Amartya Sen, the future Nobel-winning economist, jumped in and neatly summarized what he saw as Levitt's theme. "Yes," Levitt said eagerly, "that's my theme." Another fellow then offered another theme. "You're right," said Levitt, "that's my theme." And so it went, like dogs tugging at a bone, until the philosopher Robert Nozick interrupted. Oh, well, I'll talk about him in a second. "How old are you, Steve?" he asked. 26. Nozick turned to the other fellows. "He's 26 years old. Why does he need to have a unifying theme? Maybe he's going to be one of those people who's so talented he doesn't need one. He'll take a question and he'll just answer it, and it'll be fine."
And then everybody started clapping.
Yeah, right. That theme's name was Albert Einstein.
Right?
So Robert Nozick is I think he's also from Harvard. He is a libertarian economist philosopher, whatever. Yeah. One of his contentions is that free market economy can only work if you can sell a futures contract for all of the labor over your lifetime, which, if that sounds confusing, what it basically means is selling yourself into slavery.
Mm-hmm.
But, okay, I mean, I'm not really one to care to defend Robert Nozick here, but just a note is that what he actually says straight up that in his world, like while it's formally possible to make such a contract, it would be effectively unenforceable.
Okay.
Because
well, that's good. It's good that that's his objection to it.
I know the idea is that you have a sovereign contract, right? But you also are supposed to have total freedom of movement, or else like because you can't like use their contractual and whatever mechanisms to like reinstitute like the regulatory state by other means. He does. I mean, you're allowed to like have your own little ANCOM intentional community if you wanted, but like you can't like prevent. I mean, I don't know. He's very kind of. I think I forget whether or not he believes people have the right to reject. I don't think he thinks that people can reject people from their community, but I have to check again. But he. I mean, yes, it is just. But it just shows. It highlights how abstract and substanceless it is, right? Because the whole point is that he's thinking these very abstract formal laws, and so his idea is that contracting is sovereign, so therefore, like, you should be able to do this. But like, he acknowledges that it's if we should be able to do this, then his arguments against the state don't work either. Then because like in the original condition, we could just hypothesize that everybody signed one of those contracts.
If the impossible were possible, then this is how things would work. Very valuable thought exercise.
No. I mean, it's like if the slavery contract was truly, valid, then his arguments against the state being unjust don't work, because you can just hypothesize like Hobbes or no more like Locke that people in some original condition did sign these contracts, and then the question becomes, well, what about children? But as soon as you answer that, you then have to ask the substantive question of why children are different. And then you have to answer the question about, you're raised we live in a society. You're raised a certain way. You only have certain opportunities. You only have so much information, and therefore it renders it unjust. And if that renders it unjust, then we're back to the beginning again. You know what I'm saying? So it's just so it just shows, it's just a weird, like, I don't know. I
don't know if if there's like any historical evidence for this whatsoever. I really doubt it. But there are some libertarians that believe that peasants signed a pactum subjectionis to sign their rights away to the king, and that was the basis for the feudal class system.
I wouldn't put it past the feudal lords to have gone to a bunch of illiterate peasants and said, "Hey, if you don't put your fingerprint on this, I'm going to kill your children," or whatever. So I mean, that doesn't.
Well, they made a voluntary choice. You can either let your children die, which technically is not violence against you because they're your children and not you, or
but they're your property, so it is violence against you.
Oh, okay.
right. But I mean, like that's the classic shit with like right libertarian, whatever the fuck you want to call it, ANCAP shit, is that they really have no or typically very flimsy understanding or at least acknowledgement of issues of like power and violence as they operate in the real world, right? Like you said, Yungneocon, like it's just like abstract and formal and all this shit. And you're like, yeah. If you live in a perfectly airtight box and the inside is painted blue, that's great for you. But like no light is coming in, so how do you know it's blue? And how do you know it's a fucking box? And eventually you're gonna die anyway. So
All right, well, that's a longer question about whatever, but not to go all dead it, but anyway, but see, look, again, I don't know. This is a very qualified defense of the fact that, like, in the actual like literature of this stuff, these people aren't these total bozos. They do acknowledge the existence of power. They're still total assholes, right? But it's just like the common ANCAP is just like literally either 14 or a student at George Mason University. Right. Those guys though are like just cynical operators. They're not like they usually don't even trouble themselves with this. I mean, except when they I went to Mason. A lot of them fully believe it. Yes. Well, fully believe it. When they're not publishing articles like a defense of consensual pedophilia or whatever, but or whatever it is, Anyway, so he opens the book with a colorblind version of the 1990s Crime Panic and the Super Predator, and this kind of sets the tone for the whole book. Start. Because he's like, what could have explained this? Everyone else was trying to, but there was just one problem. They were wrong. Yeah, of course. The real cause was legalized abortion.
Prager you as a book.
Yeah. So his whole thing basically throughout the book is like, he states a thing and then he's like, oh, what's the explanation for this? And then he says like a really stupid explanation that, a regular person would be like, well, that's probably not it. And then he's like, oh yeah, no, the real thing is this. And that's economics.
By the way, I am now sending you a 2009 review of not only the original Levitt paper, but this went back and forth for actually a lot of times in economics because criminologists dismissed it right away, and economists were like, "No, we know your discipline better than you do." And then every time they did that, Levitt and so on would expand their subject matter. They would weaken the thesis, and they would add new data sets. And in theory, that's actually how science is supposed to work. But by the end of it, they just weren't. But anyway, the point is that even with that in mind, though, and this author argues that if you review the evidence and use the correct econometric controls, like there's basically no evidence for the claims whatsoever. But anyway, that's getting ahead of ourselves. Anyway.
Another thing he does throughout this is like he puts two absurd things next to each other and asks what they have in common. So all of his chapter titles are like this. So the first one is what do school teachers and sumo wrestlers have in common? So I'm trying to remember what the actual thing is. Oh yeah, the thing they have in common is that they both rig matches. Right. So really very spurious thing. So he starts talking about incentives, and he says, an incentive is simply a means of urging people to do more of a good thing and less of a bad thing.
That's not what an incentive is.
Right, exactly.
Dude, what the
fuck? It's not. It's funny because I literally just did a thread on this. That's not what a fucking incentive is. An incentive makes no moral claim about how good the end is, and an incentive has no implication of intentionality. And an incentive doesn't even require a rational agent. It just requires a well-defined situation with formal rules and people knowing what to do. So it's just like again, I even screwed myself up there. It doesn't require knowing what to do. It just means that like there is an abstractable order to a system involving agents in their environment. Basically, I mean that's the most abstract way of putting it. It's just total nonsense the way he talks about it. Anyway.
And more to the point, I think an incentive is just like a nice word for indirect state control. Like the state forces you to do something, whether through punishing you or offering you something through their rationing system.
In the context of policy, yes, but like if we were talking about like our ideal society and we were talking about like disincentivizing crime, like we wouldn't coercive, right? Like and if we're talking about it in the abstract, like, it's fine too. I mean, in the context of policy, incentives almost entirely always mean either fiduciary or criminal punishments and rewards, or they mean regulations, or they mean whatever. Nudges with now it's nudges.
Right.
So I nudge you to shut the fuck up, But anyway,
so here's one of the few like times he actually touches on economics as a subject. Here he says, too many Americans aren't paying their fair share of income tax. It was the economist Milton Friedman who helped come up with the solution to this one: automatic tax withholding from employees' paychecks. Cool.
I love that shit.
I wonder why you can't automatically collect taxes from corporations. That's
Yeah, funny. It's like
I guess it's because it depends on the numbers that the corporations write in their books, unlike the employee pay.
I think that Friedman would say that you could, but because Friedman doesn't. I mean, Friedman wasn't fucking in favor of income tax withholding. You know what I mean? Like, this is again, it's this abstract bullshit where he'll do stuff. He'll say like, "Oh, I don't support this thing," and then he'll create a model for how to do it. He did that a lot. That's like a libertarian. That's the fucking libertarian, like catechism. It's just like, oh, I don't support this, but here's how you do it anyway.
Yeah, I would really advise against any anarchists building bombs. But if you wanted to build a bomb, which I would recommend you don't do, here's how to do it.
Right, exactly.
That's like that bit. That's like you can't joke about calling for the assassination of the president on TV, but if you were to do so,
Yeah, right.
again, I am reminding you, this is totally illegal and not something you should do.
So he also says some of the most compelling incentives yet invented have been put in place to deter crime. Ooh, cool.
Oh, nice.
Let's see this. The teacher's part, he gets into the NCLB, which is it's No Child Left Behind.
Oh yeah,
He gets really
yeah.
into No Child Left
okay.
Behind and other high stakes testing programs. And though he mentioned moral incentive in his explanation on incentives, he doesn't really discuss the effects or morality of cutting school funding to schools that test poorly. And he, on the contrary, excitedly talks about how to make sure low-performing classes get their staff fired or their funding cut.
It's just so funny because it's just like talk about incentive incompatibility. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just like what all you're doing is creating a massive market for fraud. I think he talks about that. And then secondly, like education scores aren't like a commodity. Like if you do poorly at one point, it affects you later. So it's just like like you can't. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. So if you like punish schools for doing poorly, and everybody knew this too. They all said it. Like I mean, that was kind of the point. It was backdoor defunding, but he'll never mention that.
Yeah, he pretty much always he'll point out a problem that's like, okay, there's a very clear solution to this, and it's to get rid of the thing that's causing the problem. Like in this case, No Child Left Behind. But then he just never says it or suggests maybe that would be a good idea or what an alternative could be.
I mean, again, it's the Zen approach, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, look at this goofy problem that causes suffering all over the fucking country. Well, anyway, moving on to the next goofy problem.
I created this thing, and now it sucks that some of these things are bad. But shucks, how did we ever know that was going to happen when I said it was going to when I made it?
Right.
I mean, you can take it to the most logical conclusion. Like, if you want to really talk about incentives, nearly 100% of horrible things that people do are incentivized by the state, which should be abolished. If there's no money, then there's no salary bonus or school funding to worry about, which is he says that teachers cheat on standardized tests so that they can get bonuses, which is bullshit. It's partly true, but
they do it so they don't get fired because of his own
exactly.
thing he just said.
Exactly. So I don't know. It's just every problem he points out, he keeps stacking stuff onto it, and it's well, it sounds like the solution is to abolish capitalism and the state.
But as with all these things, the operating powerful unstated assumption, sometimes stated, is that these things are ineliminable.
Right.
By definition, there is no other order.
Right.
Things and no other possible order, and it's just again, it's just another one of these things where, in the economics literature itself, in the discipline, and you go to the conferences. Half the papers are talking about different orders, and they create all kinds of hypothetical toy models of totally different distribution systems and totally different incentive systems. In fact, they use this as their main sort of grist for thinking about institutions and information and incentives and whatever. And then it's just in the public face of it, they'll just be oh, there's actually, you can't even conceive of, you know what I mean? It's just
right.
I don't know. Yeah, he's particularly bad though. He's a particularly horrible piece of shit. Levitt. I mean, really.
Yeah.
So the sumo wrestlers thing is basically just they also rig their matches. It's not super interesting, mainly because none of us watch sumo wrestling, so it's I don't really have any connection to it.
Honestly, I will say this: this kind of shit is that like I said, it's all written in the tone of Ripley's Believe It or Not or whatever the fuck, and it's very, very convenient kind of dumbass, wacky humor that in this case is definitely taking advantage of the assumption of a white reader who exoticizes a place like Japan, and sumo wrestlers are cartoonish to them, so it's that's the joke, it's funny, he just picked a fucking thing out of a fucking travel magazine was like, oh, sumo wrestlers, that's goofy, right? That's not just a very interesting part of somebody else's culture and mythology and the way that they think about the world.
Yeah, it's weird he
like,
didn't talk about like
lifestyle.
baseball.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Like, fuck you, Levitt.
Well, I mean, not to get ahead of ourselves, but he has the chapter titled literally. What is it titled?
How the Klan is like a real estate agent.
No, I wasn't. That's. I was gonna say
horrible.
I mean, they are though.
Oh yeah, here we go. This I can't even believe this was allowed to get published. A Rashonda by any other name.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's later.
Yeah.
We'll get
Great.
there. That's just so fucking like holy
the bile rises in my throat. It is bad.
Yeah. So speaking of the quirky humor, the end of this chapter is so if sumo wrestlers, school teachers, and daycare parents all cheat, are we to assume that mankind is innately and universally corrupt? And if so, how corrupt? The answer may lie in bagels.
Oh yeah,
so random.
Bagel study.
He should have called it. God. He should have called the book "Epic Baconomics."
Yeah, seriously. Fucking asshole.
And the bagel chapter. Oh yeah, with the fucking free entrepreneurial bagel guy or whatever. That chapter doesn't. He doesn't. That chapter. I actually, when I was a kid, I was like, when I was 14, I was like a fucking, libertarian, reactionary piece of shit. Oh, yeah, totally. and I read this book twice.
So 14-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. And I read this book. Although in my defense, I was already anti-war, anti-Zionism, and an avid reader of Foucault. But anyway,
rub it in.
I remember reading that chapter and both times just being like, what the fuck is the point of this chapter? He doesn't even talk about what, like, he just says, isn't it funny that these people, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, I think I skipped over that one in my notes because
okay, so
go straight to the Klan one.
the whole point of that chapter, but it's just so indicative of his writing because, like, yeah. When he started his business, he had a 95% payment rate. Oh no, wrong case.
What
does the bagel data have to say? He left behind his open basket for cash. Too often the money vanished. Then what did he do?
Yeah. So basically, like, this guy sells bagels and he does payments on the honor system. So he like leaves a basket out in an office. And people can just take as many bagels as they want and just leave the money for them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the smaller offices are less likely to steal because there's more observation and stronger social norms.
Oh, that whole thing, right, yeah.
And then all the holidays lead to, like, lower stuff or whatever. But, the point he elides, though, is that I think he explicitly says that he makes almost as much money as he does with the bagels as he did in his, like, big office job or whatever. And so, like, this guy, even despite the theft and the free riders, this guy is making as much money as he is through this method of distributing bagels. And, like, that fact alone substantively undercuts so much of... Yes, we can talk about the surveillance incentives and the norms and all that stuff, but the point is that you can make as much money by basically, like, not doing anything and then just, like... giving out people bagels, and then if they want to, they can pay you, and then you make enough money, even though there's free riders. That just shows that, like, I mean, maybe we can't generalize it, but it definitely shows that, like, claims that, like, somehow free riding and mutual whatever, and, like, not hard work and all that stuff is always a recipe for disaster. Like, right away, I don't know.
Yeah, if there's no property, then I'll take 10 mansions, and I'm never going to work. That was a frequent thing that I heard from George Mason students. Was
right?
Yeah. Oh, if you have communism, then I want 10 mansions, and you're going to give them to me because it's communism now.
That's how that works, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
If there's no property, I'll just order up a bunch of fucking property, and then.
Like, okay, you have to clean all the toilets in those mansions, right? Oh, you don't want it anymore? Okay.
Interesting. Yeah.
No, I mean, if you're the central planner of the Politburo, you can get someone else.
Yeah, fair.
That's just dialectic.
Well, basically what I'm trying to say is I had a lot of friends admit that they never clean their own toilets.
I think that's probably the norm for like people aged, like males aged 18 to men aged 18 to whatever.
Hey, I was working and I had to clean toilets for my job. So
I understand, but I'm saying
I
like,
was doing it.
what I'm saying is I understand, but I think is that like
no, I got you.
Yeah, like if they're from a suburb primarily, I think is the big giveaway.
Yeah.
George Mason dudes especially, but just like yeah.
So one of the chapters is something like how the Klan is like a real estate company. And this is where he just starts really dropping the N-bombs.
Yeah.
And it's about information asymmetry, and so his whole thing is like, the Klan is effective because they actually only had to lynch people a few times, and then after that, people were just afraid of them. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, and then he talks about how the way they were beaten, and actually this was the only potentially cool part of this whole book, I think, was the one where he talks about how the guy who beat him by releasing all the Klan codes on like the Superman serials or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's also supposed to be his like thing, like look, like almost as liberal, like as Bill Maher said, sunlight is the best disinfectant or whatever. Like you can beat the Klan with information and codes. Like,
holding up my gangrenous stump to the sun and wailing, why isn't this working?
He's like, what else would have solved this if you're, whatever. There's an information asymmetry between the living and the dead, too.
There is a massive asymmetry there,
So here's a take on information asymmetries that age like dog shit, which is information asymmetries everywhere have in fact been mortally wounded by the internet. So this was just before Facebook and Google created like the largest surveillance engines of all human history, where none of us can look at the information, but they certainly can.
Right,
and
but for
they
Levitt,
know everything that we're doing.
That is the end of information asymmetry.
Okay.
Because the asymmetry was that we had information about ourselves and our preferences and the behavior that the companies didn't. So we as consumers had a distinct advantage over these companies. And so
the first one, the first asymmetry that he talks about is after that is like the real estate company, which is like some website that let you look up like median home prices or something like that. It like brought the prices of houses down temporarily or something like that, because prior to that, real estate companies would keep the listing prices like kind of secret, and so somebody basically posted them all on the internet, and that destroyed the information asymmetry and made houses more affordable. Which, again, this book was published in 2009. In 2005. So right before it all fucked up.
Yeah. And as we know, houses are all just $10 a pop now, because we all know, that they're $10 a pop, and that's what keeps rampant.
The price of computing power went down, and so did the price of square footage.
There was nothing they could do.
All because of the internet. Thanks.
Stop us. Yeah.
I mean, I think he's the type of person who would refer to like Amazon's predatory marketing practices as the same kind of resolution of information asymmetry as he's talking about with the real estate agents. You know what I mean? Because what is the claim? That the prices before were able to vary because no one else had information about what other producers sold at. So Amazon's service was by eliminating these information asymmetries, which, like, in the isolated real estate example sounds nice or whatever, but then you realize that, like, the same person who's providing the information service is also selling the thing that the information is about. And so, it's just...
and then also Amazon does fulfillment services for small businesses, and they surveil what they sell and take the most popular items that they sell and make their own version of it and undercut them.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's so funny because go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, because that's just that's their solution is they're like, we're ending information asymmetries for consumers between these competing producers by recreating a whole other set of even more toxic information asymmetries that are now coupled to power and market share where they weren't at before. So it's just like it's like the different. I don't know. It's like 7-Eleven might have cheaper prices than like a local convenience store, but like I don't know where I'm gonna go with that. The 7-Eleven will never
do donuts aren't as good
when you're on a downtime or whatever. I don't know.
So yeah, that's we have to move kind of quickly to get through all the chapters, I guess. So that's the end of that chapter, and that's all I'll cover on that. So the next one is why do drug dealers still live with their moms?
And this chapter pisses me off specifically because of it's with with Sudhir Venkatesh, who's a Chicago sociology grad, and he's okay as a sociologist.
Yeah, he's at least doing empirical research, which is good.
Yeah, but then he leveraged this into this like TED Talk style, like whatever, and on NPR and whatever. And that's all he does.
He brings up this like right wing bugbear of the time, which is a dispute over the number of houseless people in the U.S. So there's some activist, Mitch Snyder, that fought for houseless people in the 80s and 90s, and he claimed that there were 3 million homeless people in the U.S. Reagan said it was no more than 250,000, and Levitt is pissed off about this, the fact that he said a wrong number in the 90s.
Who did?
Mitch Snyder.
Oh,
so he's more angry about Mitch Snyder than he is about Ronald Reagan, of course. And Levitt makes an unsourced claim that Snyder told a college campus that 45 homeless people die every second.
Wow.
Which I really doubt that happened. And then he follows with this gem.
Even if he did, what's like an offhand comment in a class is not like...
Yeah, oh wow, he said a wrong thing once.
Right.
Hey, let's look at your book right now and see what wrong things we can find in it.
Well, it's like, wait, just look. This is Sudhir Venkatesh's books, right? Okay, first book, American Project: The Rise and Fall of American Ghetto, Harvard University Press, 2000. Off the books, The Underground Economy of the Urban Poor, Harvard University Press, 2006. But then, Gang Leader for a Day, a rogue sociologist takes to the street, Penguin Press, 2008. Floating City, a rogue sociologist lost and found in New York's underground economy, Penguin Press, 2013. He contributed to Levitt and Dubner's Why Do Drug Dealers Live with Their Mom? In 2009, he was in a documentary. All these NPR. So it's like he doesn't even do academic work anymore. He just totally leverages this into a public topic thing, which is, in my opinion, literally disgusting. But not for like any sort of reasons of like authenticity or whatever. But it totally compromises the capacity to actually do like robust academic scholarly work. There's exceptions to this rule, like the book Evicted by Desmond, I believe. And that's a mixture of journalism and sociology, but it's like a real book. It's not like it's like he does like real actual methodological stuff like in this. It. Yeah, there's like a methodological section. There's and so it's fine. But Venkatesh is I don't know. Yeah, what we have there's a term for this. We call it like what's the term? We call it like not it's like something like action ethnographer or something for people who do these like ethnographies in like edgy places. So it'd be like with drug dealers or whatever. Like adventurer ethnographers, and it's supposed to be an insult. It's like saying like you prioritize sensationalism and like some exotic notion of danger over actual investigation of research. And apparently, I don't know, I can't source this, so I don't want to get libeled for it. Libel's claim forward. So allegedly, I've heard that Venkatesh did some like shady things with regards to. Actually, I don't give a shit if he did gang stuff, but I mean, like, with regards to, like, the academic aspect of it. But allegedly, I say, okay. Anyway.
I do think he's too much of a coward to smoke crack.
I mean, he probably did actually have to.
But anyway, so after this thing about Mitch Snyder, he says about Snyder, it may be sad but not surprising to learn that experts like Snyder can be self-interested to the point of deceit.
Oh yeah,
Like classic behavior of someone who's pathologically self-interested, dedicating your life to advocating for the most vulnerable people in society. Not like a guy who writes a book about how good economics is and never asks important ethical questions about what he's doing.
Well, that's what I was saying about the Republicans using this as a cudgel. Like, for them, it's like an own if, like, a leftist or a humanitarian is anything but 100%, like, consistent, authentic, good, and selfless. But then, like,
But if you are, then you're virtue signaling.
Right, yeah, but everybody else, it's just like, they could be as pathological, cynical, evil as they want. Like, but it's like, I mean, a lot of it's just cynical, just like, political, whatever. But I think
there's
part
two
of it
types of people in this world, son: Jesus and Hitler.
Right, but I mean, basically, that's how a lot of these people look at it, and it's like there's this moralistic, sentimental mentality which like believes that somehow if like you do the right thing but for the wrong reasons, it's no longer right, or like that like that you have to be like self-consistent and honest and authentic in whatever you do. And I don't even know what those mean, to be honest, because I don't know. I don't have some like authentic self that I can be consistent to. I'm just
there's that whole altruism is really selfishness thing. And it's like, okay, who cares?
And it's like, but that's irrelevant. Like, it's like, so it's saying like the motive, the subconscious, unconscious, or unstated but conscious motive is somehow more real than the behavioral pattern and the outcomes.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's just like, you don't even have to like, you can like, I don't know.
It's like that guy didn't save you from drowning because he cares about you. He saved you from drowning because he wants to look like a hero. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, fucking quit, and I'm glad you want to be a hero, right?
Okay, put me back in then.
Right. And it's funny. It's like when I was having the debate on Twitter a long time ago about like how people don't really understand like the term like exchange or whatever. Yeah. Someone said to me, like, they were like, well, I said, okay, so under communism, if like I am good at, I don't know what, social science, and my friend is good at guitar, and I teach them sociology, they teach me guitar, is like that an exchange that should be criminalized? And they're like, no, because like if you under communism, you won't be doing it for like your own self-benefit, you'll be doing it because like it's good or whatever. So I'm like, so wait, so for you, the differentiation between like exchange and mutual aid, between like a selfish capitalist exchange and true whatever, is the intention and the existence and authenticity of the intention of the people involved. And you call yourself a materialist? That's fucking Christianity. That's not fucking That's literally the fucking like Paul gospel or whatever. Like, it's just like that's absurd. Goodness revealed unto the world like ceases to be goodness because now you're doing it for other people. That's fucking Christianity. That's like not even the good kind. That's the fucking shitty kind. That's the like I don't know. It's so funny to me that like how quickly people will devolve into petty moralism. Anyway, this is on topic of Freakonomics. I mean, actually, it is kind of related because this is what he does. But
true.
Anyway,
so after ranting about this guy lying one time about statistics.
How do we even know he was lying?
Well, because he said there was 3 million homeless people in the U.S., which is definitely not true.
But
that is a real claim. But
couldn't he have just been wrong?
Right, exactly.
True. Yes.
Again with intentionality, right? Again with intentionality.
And then like because he could have been meaning housing insecure, which almost certainly at least 3 million people were housing insecure.
That's true too. Yeah,
I mean, it's like I mean, I have a problem.
And when I looked for the source of that claim, it was in some like right wing account of something that he said. It did have a direct quote, but like still, it was like it was a person trying to get this guy. So like who gives a shit? But anyway, so like let's move on from that. So he starts talking about Venkatesh's work, which is about, as Levitt puts it, ghetto criminal gangs or something like that. Like, he calls them ghetto criminals repeatedly.
But then he's like, his like real lesson though is like, oh, despite all the racist and exoticizing tropes I've just said about gangs, you might be interested to learn that running a gang is actually like running a McDonald's, right? He's just like,
you're like, yeah.
He's like, they keep account books and of inventory and supply and demand, and they
do math just like white people do.
Yeah, they workers, and they do math, and they have exchanges and balance sheets, and guess what? The people at the top earn a lot of money, and the people at the bottom don't. Isn't that?
By the way, I'm a guy who thinks capitalism is good.
Right? It's just like no, actually no. But I think that was his actual like defense of criminal gangs. That's what I'm saying. I think that like that's in his weird, bizarre way. That was him like being like, oh yeah. After all this racist stuff I just said,
they're good, just like corporations.
Exactly. But actually, you might be surprised to know that your racist tropes are wrong, because actually these are good capitalists who are just
he's
right.
Exactly. He's providing like a redemptive moral formula for people who are like seen as like violent thugs in the racist whatever image, because he's like, well, but they also subjugate the less powerful through like a horrible rigid hierarchy that extracts wealth toward the top. So that means that they're actually good and legitimate,
Right. and it's like had he not framed them as these like violent, evil savages, like which he does, then there wouldn't have been any need for that redemptive arc in the first place. Because at least to me, I mean, maybe his readership, but like, I never fucking doubted the humanity and the entrepreneurial spirit of fucking gang members. That's like, what? That's childish. What? Of course, like, of course they are strategic, and of course they're fucking human beings. It's just like,
well, yeah, exactly.
Rito's gonna have to think that like, these people are humans and they're innately valuable for being living people, but fortunately they're just like corporate leaders. So
exactly.
So
just go with that instead.
So actually, the drug war is good, right? Like,
yeah.
that's like an ML argument too. But actually, drug gangs are capitalist, so therefore, drug war is actually good. I mean, Parenti literally does make that argument, but
so he talks about Venkatesh's work, which is basically he embedded with this crack dealing gang in Chicago, and he managed to get his hands on the financials of the gang and analyze them from an economic perspective. Mm-hmm. And in this story, of course, he's dropping in bombs left and right, still with the hard R, even though it was allegedly said by like these crack dealing guys. I don't see that being the case, but I think he didn't want to put the soft A in there and look unserious.
I mean, there are like specific quote which Venkatesh knows. There are like specific quotation practices for like ethnography and stuff, especially when you're dealing with uncomfortable things. I mean, first of all, actually, as a rule, when you encounter an uncomfortable thing, or like something that's like bad that could be compromising for the person who said it or whatever, you normally shouldn't even usually publish it at all necessarily, but otherwise what you do is you keep your notes of it and then you provide a stated summary of it, and then you can always source it if you need to, but like you actually hide the identity in their speech. But like anyway, I mean, the information he gives in this chapter could literally be used to like arrest these people, right? It's not that hard to figure out who was the gang leader at the time when Venkatesh was doing the stuff and who said what, right? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's just, and he knows he's not supposed to do that. He had a criminal justice grant, I think, from the government. You're specifically not supposed to do that. But anyway.
So the financials are somewhat interesting. The gang is basically structured like a franchise with a board of directors and independent territories run by separate hierarchies. They are very they don't actually contest the territories as much as you'd think. They do, but not as much as you'd think.
Well, because it's costly to do so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, exactly.
The leaders, like the boards of directors, they earned six figures while the rest earned minimum wage or less. If you were a typical member, your chances of being killed over a 4-year period were 25%. So if you were in a gang with 3 other guys for 4 years, one of you probably wouldn't make it. And so
it's a bit like capitalism.
here's a quote I pulled here. He says, "So if crack dealing is the most dangerous job in America, and if the salary is only $3.30 an hour, why on earth would anyone take such a job? Well, for the same reason that a pretty Wisconsin farm girl moves to Hollywood."
What the fuck?
Exactly the same reason.
I mean, but the point is that because people have overstated, I guess, in his view, overstated views of their own capacities and are just trying to make it big by taking and no risk, no reward, right, or whatever.
Right.
But
and much like the crack dealers, 1 in 4 Wisconsin farm girls will be dead within 4 years.
Also, it's just funny because in economics, right, it's just like it's not like preferences are supposed to exert some inexorable pull on behavior. You also have to look at what people alternatives are, their capabilities and their alternatives. So if the choices between, I mean, I think he does have a throwaway line on this, but if the choices
he does
a $3.11 an hour, which by the way, I mean that's more than it is now, but and like either unemployment or or not being able to pay for your mother's medicine, or having to work in like some horrible like factory yard or slaughterhouse. I mean, just like what there's no count. It's like, it's just so, you can't discuss alternatives.
It's just so fucking white. It's the whitest shit
well,
ever.
But for discussing white people, he would almost certainly address the alternatives to action. So when
exactly. Well, because he knows those.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. But Venkatesh knows those too. I mean, that's what the book is about. So it's just like when white people do, I mean, we see this, like we always hear this with the school shootings and stuff. Like it's just like it's always explained away as like either pathology or lack of options, for the white working class or whatever. Like, but then like for anybody else, poverty is their fault. Totally preference directed. They are sovereign, complete agents capable of defining the world around them. You know what I mean? It's just like,
yep. Oh man. I have another one of his wacky comparisons. I didn't actually put the next part because it just pissed me off. It was now for another unlikely question. What did crack cocaine have in common with nylon stockings?
Oh, cool.
But anyway, so you can't have a chapter on crack cocaine during the peak of the crack epidemic without touching on the Iran-Contra scandal. So he says, Blandon would later claim that he was selling the cocaine to raise money for the CIA-sponsored Contras back home in Nicaragua. He liked to say that the CIA was in turn watching his back in the United States, allowing him to sell cocaine with impunity. This claim would spark a belief that still sees to this day, especially among urban blacks, that the CIA itself was the chief sponsor of the American crack trade. Which, of course, he doesn't believe that.
I mean, the chief sponsor is overstated, but the accusation that they stood by and benefited from it, I mean, that's not conspiracy theory. That's like congressional. I mean, okay, what is with Gary Webb, Dark Triangle, whatever, he killed himself and all that stuff. And his original book did contain conspiratorial stuff and over inference and bad sourcing or whatever. But then even like later, like they did reviews of him and journalistic reviews of how they treated him at Washington Post, New York Times, and these government congressional reviews. And the overwhelming tone of these reviews were critical. They're like, oh, he was still wrong. But if you read the things, both of them, all of them, they have these throwaway lines where they're like, oh, but actually, like some of the central substance of his claims could in fact have been, were in fact true with regards to allowing this to happen. You know what I mean? It's just so it's these reports being like, see, he's wrong because here is a softer version of the claim that he made that's true. Mm-hmm. Like, it was just like, I don't know, whatever. There's actually like
the CIA wasn't the number 1 dealer of crack; they were the number 3 dealer of crack. So he's just wrong.
They were like, the CIA was like, he's like the bouncer at the club who turns a blind eye to like the drug dealing so that they can get a cut from it.
Yeah.
Right.
And also that like if anybody causes trouble at the bar, they know the drug dealers will take care of it for them. So it gets to. In fact, this is a very good analogy for how the CIA related to these drug dealers. But that is in effect. Those are the two things they did for them. They got the money and whatever, and then they used them, especially in Mexico and South America, as like anti-communist police, basically. But anyway.
So Levitt talks about how the crack epidemic was worse for black people than any single thing since Jim Crow. And suddenly the violent crime wave that resulted from it disappeared without a trace. And this is where he launches into the next chapter, which I'm pretty sure is about how abortion stopped violent crime.
Wait. I think it was in this chapter that he discusses the broken windows thesis, the crack cocaine one. So that's I think key too, because even before he patents the stuff about
just ripping off the original version of Freakonomics, which is Economics in One lesson by Henry Hazlitt.
But what's his, the broken windows thesis was James Q. Wilson and what's his face in the 70s or 80s in Public and the Atlantic magazine, and they drew on some misuse of a social psychology paper to argue that it was like the deterioration of the morality of an area. I mean, like basically like. If you let public indecency...
Oh, yeah, because, there's a bunch of bandos in crime-ridden areas, and so, like, that means that having a bando causes crime, basically.
Right. And by the way, there is evidence that, deterioration of infrastructure and of cultural norms and inaccessibility of public space and lack of eyes on the street, as it's called, all encourage crime. That's indisputably the case. However, the mechanism is not through the freaking fucking construct of, moral indecency and like the solution.
Yeah, the solution is to fix the infrastructure and not arrest people.
Right. And they say like, and it's like if the problem is not enough eyes on the street, then coercing, like putting the fucking bunch of police everywhere so people don't go out is not going to solve the problem. And then finally, even in the fucking James Q. Wilson paper, the broken windows, whatever, they say again as a throwaway line, yes, studies show that these policies don't really reduce crime. However, residents polled felt they reduced crime.
Yes, feelings.
And,
love that.
And so I just sent you a link to a review of the Broken Windows literature and shows that it's horseshit. But just so that, and this is by the way what led to in the early '90s in New York, stop and frisk, all of these new. It's a very big milestone in the militarization of the police. And in mass incarceration, and the super criminals thing. It started when you got to have this thing where it's like spitting on the subway became a fine. And the thing is that after, 3 unpaid, misdemeanor civil infractions in the city, right, you gain a criminal infraction of a felony, right? So there's actually if you can't pay for it or you're just afraid of going in and paying for it or whatever, if you man spread, spit on the ground and jump the turnstile 3 times, you have a felony and don't pay it, you have a felony thing. And so there's literally, I think, I don't know, this number seemed, I have to look at it again, but it may have been as high as like 1 million people in New York City are like criminalized, living as like legal criminals, and they don't even realize it. Like, wow. They could be. I need to look at the exact numbers and stuff, but it's actually absurd. It's clearly a racket. First of all, it's also clearly just racist.
That'd be like 1 in 18 people or something like that.
Yeah. Well, if it's for the city proper, it's 1 in 8. But that's why I need to check on it. But the other thing is that what is it like? So if you look at the arrests for things like these civil infractions, like jumping turnstiles or putting your feet up on the seats in the subway or whatever, they always occur at the end of the month. Like the last 3 days of the month, and they always occur like around night, around like midnight when no one's on the train, and they always occur in poor and black neighborhoods. And so it's like I remember there was this BuzzFeed thing about like man spreading laws in New York or whatever, and everyone's like, "Oh wow, this is great," and then like you looked at it, and it was immediately used to just harass marginalized people, like whatever. And this all stems from this fucking broken windows shit that he's boosting in this book, and it's horseshit. It's just. Anyway.
So the next chapter is called What Makes a Perfect Parent? And he talks about statistical death risks to children. Then he cites a book that was sensational at the time. Go ahead.
Wait. we didn't talk about where all the criminals have gone though.
Oh, okay. I didn't have that in my notes.
Oh, but because that's where he talks about several things. He talks about guns, he talks about genetics, he talks about punishment, and he talks about abortion. So he basically says, there's this crime boom, right, that occurred in the 60s up until the 90s, and and then it dropped off immediately without explanation. And his explanation is abortion, because poor and people by his imagining, due to genetics, predisposed to criminality, were aborted at higher rates. Now, the problem with this is that, first of all, the crime boom happened in the same form, though not the same scale and level. This is key. The same rate, but not the same scale and level. I know, but in every single post-war industrial economy. It happened in Japan, it happened in Canada, it happened in France, it happened in America, it happened in Australia, it happened in Spain, it happened in every single one of these places. Not the same magnitude, but the same shape. Secondly, it fell in all these places at the same time too. And third, these countries all had incredibly different abortion laws, incredibly different drug laws, incredibly different incarceration rates.
Didn't you say it occurred in Ireland?
Yeah, it occurred everywhere. And so,
because I remember reading your thread about this a while ago.
Well, Canada, for example, had the rate of crime fall during the same period. The rate of incarceration fall during the same period, even though their crime rate fell during the same period at the same rate as the United States. So that's the first problem. Secondly, the demographic boom part of it, which he mentions, is probably true that was the main, because that's one of the main things in common between these places. But the other things in common between these places is what? Rise in social alienation. Industrial pollution may have had some effect, but I'm skeptical of that one. Changes in policing structure, urbanization, social dislocation, and rising inequality, and a lot of other things that they did. Change in the highway system, infrastructure system, all this stuff.
Isn't social inequality the most reliable predictor of violent crime in a society?
That's a longer conversation. Okay. The short answer from public rhetoric is yes. The academic answer is no. Because it's more about deprivation and status inequality and a few other things and social ties. Right. I mean, crime is caused by 35,000 different factors, right? It's deprivation and status and crime and institutions and upbringing and
I don't know. I think it's caused by personal responsibility.
Exactly, right? So that's the other thing he says is that so there's explanations, right? Okay, first of all, abortion did not occur in all these same places at the same time. Abortion did not occur among the groups of people that he thinks are responsible for this. Third, crime rates fell and rose in places irrespective of their abortion rates. And then the other thing, though, is that he says mass incarceration solved it because mass incarceration ballooned during this time. And he says that, whatever. But again, incarceration fell in some places and rose in others, but they had the same rates. Same thing with the proactive policing. And Bruce Western did a study in his great book, Punishment and Inequality in the United States. He reanalyzed the data and he looked at whatever. And he showed that for every 66% rise in the imprisonment rate, there was a 3% fall in crime. That's it. Compared to his near to one-to-one explanation. And by the way, that's just the direct fall, right? When you look at the counterbalancing effects of social dislocation and inequality, which are and lack of faith in the law that occur with mass incarceration, the net effect is actually either zero or increases crime. So, so there's Bruce Western and there's a few other people, Tom Tyler, Todd Clear. They all discuss this stuff, and I think this is important because this shows just how deep his bullshit runs, because the central claim of his book, based on this notion of incentives, and prisons therefore are the best example because it's straightforward. You commit, I mean, it's not that straightforward, but you know what I mean.
He said it was the best incentive or the most powerful incentive.
The most straightforward, except somehow it didn't work in communism or whatever. But he says that, and so but the fact of the matter is, it's not true. Fear of the law fear of punishment does not predict compliance with the law, unless there is a near 100% relationship between being caught. But the severity of punishment doesn't predict it. It's the frequency. So a slap on the wrist, which occurs 100% of the time, is a more effective deterrent than the death penalty occurring 50% of the time. That's why restorative justice works. But the other point is that the biggest predictor of, for example, one of the biggest predictors of whether or not people follow the law is whether or not they believe the law is just and fair and valid. Another one is whether or not they have strong ties to their community. Another is their their options and alternatives. The other is social peer pressure. The other is availability of education, wages, employment, useful activity, and so on. The other is like all these things like eyes on the street, as we were talking about. At the end of the day, the incentives in the form of monetary incentives matter for like burglary and stuff. But like, for example, the introduction of certain kinds of things in cars like GPS and like non-stealable radios and certain kinds of car alarms, those did basically, end a lot of auto theft in many places. But that's very few things you can do that for. Same thing. Home security systems may have an effect on house robberies, but that's burglaries. That's but that's about it. Like everywhere else, like the financial and direct incentives don't matter as much as the conditions, the constraints, the capacities, the resources, and their distribution and their relation. And that point undercuts not only just like this book, but 99% of the public discourse on economics and free markets and individuals, and including on the left when they're being moralistic and sentimental. But and I think that's just so key. There's this great book by Bernard Harcourt. Is that his name? First name Bernard. The book is called The Illusion of Free Markets. His last name is Harcourt. I forget his first name. He's a law professor at U Chicago, which is funny given his relationship with this guy. But this book talks about how the spread of mass incarceration and not mass incarceration, but incarceration in general, the prison system, the sort of Benthamite idea of the panopticon, the idea of the prison as the moral reformer, the carceral system, the police, surveillance, all this other stuff, and the discourse of individual responsibility, free will, morality, whatever, accompanied the spread of capitalism in literally every single fucking place it occurred. And so his whole point is that, like, if that's the case, then that means that you're we already knew this technically, like analytically and say formally, but he's saying, look, even historically and intellectually and ideologically and structurally, like this shows that there is no such thing as a market, like a capitalist system that does not depend on a carceral system and on policing and the state and prisons. And, economists are more wont to admit that these days, but the fact of the matter is that it's often denied or seen as not a violation of freedom. And the other point is that, it shows that capitalism is not just an economic system in as much as it's also a moral system and a disciplinary system.
Yep.
It's a system for controlling, and this is the Foucauldian point or whatever, but it's just like, it's a system for shaping people as subjects as such. And like the prison system, surveillance, policing, carcerality, the military, bureaucracy, NatSec, all these institutions are fundamental to this system. And they're fundamental to shaping the way we live and relate to each other. And ideas don't move history, but it's certainly the case that ideological drivel, like fucking Levitt and Dubner, is used as a retroactive post hoc justification for this nonsense. And that the left internalizes this individualism and moralism. All right, this is one of my biggest spiels my whole life, so I just have to get it out there because this has been a spiel of mine since I was 18. It's like something that very strongly bothers me. But anyway, that's it. Anyway,
yeah, my summary would be capitalism is statecraft.
But I mean, I'm saying this is kind of even more sinister than that. Like, there's like a deeper kind of almost, I don't want to say psychology or whatever here, but there is this like strong connection between, because again, there are cynical people and opportunists, but a shit ton of these people actually believe the lies they're selling.
Yep.
A shit ton of these people legitimately believe that morality and individual free will and authenticity are sufficient justification for sticking a needle in someone's fucking arm and killing them, or fucking throwing people in cages or letting people die in the street. And so that the justification across these three things is shared so intensely and so emotionally and so sentimentally, and the fact that it's like almost aestheticized, and the fact that it's also held in the form of this like Protestant moralism and stuff on the left as well, that is incredibly distressing, because that means that like killing the cop in our head is a lot more difficult than people are realizing. But anyway, and a lot more important than people realize. Like, like central, like we all like need to realize that we have been trained. I mean, partially, there's evidence for the innateness of the retributive response, but not to the fucking degree that we have, and not for its institutionalization. And so like the fact of the matter is, this is why I say retributivism is one of the biggest fucking scourges in the world ideologically, and that's what his whole thing is selling. It's like a gussed up formalist justification for throwing people in cages, basically. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it's as I personally have because I came to a lot of the same realizations as yourself, is that it's like this kind of subliminal shit as much as it is anything else. It's but as I've expressed to people who I think were struggling with the fact that like we on the left have internalized all this shit, and it's a lot of people sincerely believe all this. Often what I say is I believe that we can approach some kind of utopian world given perhaps a certain number of material victories in the future, but it will still take us 1,000 years to get there culturally, because we've all been so deeply poisoned. And so I try to just kind of pace myself and just approach things like, this is where we're at, this is how fucked up we actually are, it seems, and to that deconstruction and that removal of the poisons over time will it's the work of a lifetime, and it's the work of many communities.
I think what we need to do is we need to get together all of the world's biggest sweeties, and they're going to be the only ones that are allowed to raise kids, and the rest of us are going to volunteer to go fuck off. We can gamble and drink and kill ourselves like the normal way that we do, and then this other generation won't have any of our culture at all.
Unfortunately, I think the sweeties are also the ones who are like most likely to vote for UKIP and the BJP.
Oh no, I'm talking about like the street fight boys. The seriously wrong boys.
Oh. No, I don't want kids raised by those sociopaths.
Okay, so now we can move on to the what makes a perfect parent thing. So this is all about this sensational book. I didn't really write much of a summary. I didn't write the title or anything like that. But the book basically claims that parenting doesn't matter, and that parents' only real contribution to child development is genetics. But I'm pretty sure that they are mistaking genetics for heritability, for one thing. But so he says this about it. He says, Harris argued, albeit gently, that parents are wrong to think that they contribute so mightily to their child's personality. This belief, she wrote, was a cultural myth. Harris argued that the top-down influence of parents is overwhelmed by the grassroots effect of peer pressure, the blunt force applied each day by friends and schoolmates. But Harris's theory was duly endorsed by a slate of heavyweights. Among them was Steven Pinker, noted child welfare expert Steven Pinker.
I mean, it's just like so, like just dishonest. See, more dishonest usage of evidence here, right? Because he'll point to something where like the inelasticity of a behavior to something is not affected by a policy. So, for example, certain crime policies didn't work or whatever, or whatever. But then he's just like it's probably true that conscious application by parents in attempts to control and shape their child's personality and their whatever will probably not work. But that doesn't. The idea that parents still affect like your norms and what you say and what peer groups you end up with and what your habits in your schools, and they can either fuck you up and abuse you, or they can support you, or some mixture of both. And there's all these things do have very provable causal effects in real time. It's not like it's a question. I mean, We can hold.
Yeah,
genetics
I'm sure children have the same politics and religion as their parents because of genetics.
Right, exactly. Exactly, right, and like and all this stuff, and then just like, first of all, he says what he says. What does he say? That life outcomes are what 99% inherited. He gives some absurd number, right?
Yeah.
First of all, even if you are lumping together like epigenetics, genetics, like maternal effects and womb effects and like neonatal nutrition and early upbringing and all this other stuff. The idea that any trait is 99% heritable, besides like height, it's just like is absolute horseshit. I mean, it's just like the hereditary
traits are 1% inspiration and 99% haplogroups.
Right. And it's just there's almost no trait that's like that. Like, I mean, not almost no. I mean, there are some traits like, height is like the almost 100% of the variance is explained in the population is explained by genetics. Although that itself is misleading because the population average itself varies because of the environment. So, But anyway, people don't usually understand that distinction.
Let's say Huntington's disease is 100% genetics.
Yes. Right. I mean, yeah, sure. There we go. That's one example, but that's not even really a trait, It's like, but and the number of monogenic traits is very small, but 99%. No one credible would ever see that. The highest I've seen, even aside from Twitter shithead like hereditarians or whatever. Aside from them, like. And even in academia, even among the most like shitty sociopathic, evil psych and behavioral genetics types people, their estimates are usually smart enough to cap their estimates at like 60%. You know what I mean? Like that's like the high. I've seen like 80%, 75%, 80%. In some cases, but like mostly like precisely because the research clings to like the 50% number, which probably is an artifact of preconceived notions affecting study design. That's another question. But you have to be very stupid to believe that something like life outcomes are 99% heritable, let alone through the sole mechanism of genetics. I mean, that's literally like La La Land level nonsense. That's like that's
well.
That's
speaking of being stupid, he talks about this Chicago public school system program that it was a school choice program.
Oh.
Maybe I didn't write the name down, but it was a school choice program that used a lottery-based acceptance system. So instead of taking on everyone because they didn't want to, fully fund the system and let everyone go where they wanted to, they had a lottery to randomly select people, which that's okay, cool. I support lotteries in that sense. But so he brings it up because he says it resembles a large scale experiment, and again he's saying this to talk about genetics, which he more clearly here confuses with heritability. So there's these test scores in the Chicago public school systems, and there are certain traits that that are measured on the children, and so he lists 8 traits. And he wants you to guess which ones do correlate with test scores and which ones don't. So the traits are the child has highly educated parents. The child's parents have high socioeconomic status. The child's mother was 30 or older at the time of her first child's birth. The child had low birth weight. The child's parents speak English in the home. The child is adopted. The child's parents are involved in the PTA. And the child has many books in his home. So first of all, about half of these are just like you have rich parents, highly educated parents, high SES,
or you grow up in a neighborhood where people are rich, even if your parents aren't.
Right.
Like 95% of the rebuttals against deprivation studies and in class studies can be addressed if that point is taken into account. Also, if you look at regression, like the life course, rather. So if you're 20 years old, your income is not very highly correlated with your parents, but if you're 60 years old, it's almost the same almost. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Damn, I didn't write down which were the actual answers. I think it was.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it right now, but
highly educated parents, high SES. Let's see. Adopted, I think, was one of them. No, adopted was not one of them. Low birth weight, I think, was one of them. And many, involved in the PTA. I don't remember, but basically, like, most of them were, you have high socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
Which big fucking shock.
Yeah.
And he talks about IQ and the heritability of IQ. He says that child's academic abilities are far more influenced by the IQs of his biological parents than the IQs of his adoptive parents. And mothers who give up their children for adoption tend to have significantly lower IQs than the people who are doing the adopting. There is another explanation for low-achieving adoptees, which, though it may seem distasteful, jibes with the basic economic theory of self-interest. A woman who knows she will put her baby up for adoption may not take the same prenatal care as a woman who is keeping her baby.
What the fuck?
Consider, at the risk of furthering the distasteful thinking, how you treat your car you own. How you treat a car you own versus a car you are renting for the weekend.
The fucking Christ! This is nothing.
I mean,
oh my God!
That's a sociopathic thing to say. Where I'm trying to find that line, but
yeah,
it's just.
I'm guessing he has like a meticulously clean home, but like wrecks up any place where someone else has to clean it up.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Right.
This is funny. He says, "You know, it's funny because I'm the opposite. I live in squalor, but I'll always clean up myself in other places."
Same.
I'm similar. Yeah.
But it's funny. So he talks about this thing: the 8 variables that aren't predictive. I mean, in this study, he says, but it's like the child's family is intact, parents move to a better neighborhood, Head Start, regularly spanked, parents read to him, frequently watches television. But the fact of the matter is we all independently do know that those are predictive, and actually highly so. And in instrumentalized control individual studies and on the population-wide level, they both reveal that. I mean, the post-tax average income of the neighborhood you live in matters even more than your own households in many ways, because how safe your school is and how good your school is and how many friends you have is determined by that, as well as what resources you're exposed to, as opposed to you know what I mean? So child's family is intact.
Yeah, property taxes determine your school funding.
Education,
and so if you have a bunch of rich neighbors, then you have a better school.
And then it's and there's these salutary effects, if they all get tutors and stuff or whatever, there's gonna be some sort of you know what I mean, yep. And probably going to have better roads and what, you know what I mean. So it's just we know spanking leads to behavioral and attention issues. We've known that we have 50 years of 50-year studies that show that. We know that with Head Start probably doesn't, and early pre-K probably doesn't enhance their doing well in school, but not going to it worsens it. We know that's that's a distinction that people really rarely make, and it allows him to get away with this.
So it's more other kids get ahead of you, then you fall behind.
Right. It's sort of there's a mean toward which we cling, and it's easier to fuck people up from the mean than it is to make them get ahead of it. So it's just which is why, by the way, even if in the genetic studies, I mean, these are all doubtable for their own reasons, for 100 reasons, including whatever. But even in the studies of IQ that they use to justify this stuff, they find that the variance explained by genetics is higher among wealthy people and lower among non-wealthy people. And the reason is that wealthy people have homogeneous environments. So of course the effect is going to look smaller from the environment, whereas people from poor neighborhoods have more heterogeneous environments. It's the Tolstoy, all happy families are happy in the same way. All unhappy are unhappy in their own way. And I mean, again, that doesn't, the IQ stuff, class stuff, that's just bullshit. I mean, it's just there's so many things wrong with it. But just as an illustration, the way that they do not disentangle, intra and intergroup variance, mean level stuff, interactive effects, heritability, and the asymmetry of causality. I mean, it's just like, unless you do that, unless you disaggregate those effects, you have no capacity to talk about the subject at all. You know what I mean? Especially if your goal is giving people advice, right? You know what I mean? Anyway.
Yeah.
So let's see. I'm trying to.
But and by the way, what's his metric here for success? It's
Test scores.
It's test scores.
Yeah.
Right.
And that in itself is revealing, right? Because just like, well, for whatever,
Yeah,
a lot of reasons.
he had a fucking chapter where he said that test scores are rigged by teachers.
That's true. That's a different kind of test, though. That's a different kind of test, right? That's them ringing the performance assessment of the class. This is like you don't get any benefit for performing. Yeah, whatever, right? No, actually, it is the thing. No, it is. Well, because I have to look at the study, because depending on whether or not they used the school testing, the IQ testing, or the AFQT matters a lot, actually. But I don't know. I have to look at it. There's a really wonderful book called Intersectional Inequality by these guys, Reagan and Fiss. And there was a book a while that came out a long time ago called Inequality by Design that was a rebuttal to the bell curve. And it showed, using hundreds of, not hundreds, but a ton of fucking variables to show why the results were bullshit. The beauty of this book, the Reagan and Fiss, is that it's, first of all, it's only like 100 pages. And it only uses like 6 variables to show that it's bullshit, because it just like, it shows, it weights the variables against like their conditional priors, and it uses like a set theoretical method to like, such that instead of like having to like sort out interaction effects after the fact, it's clumped in such a way that it's always in there and it's always against its whatever. It's a whole whatever. But it's very unique, very innovative method. And they're basically able to show with just like 5 variables that any of these IQ and test score claims are nonsense. Like, it's just like it's like, you just clump education, parental education, income, race, gender, test scores, or whatever, and like all of the explanatory effect, the parent explanatory effect of like, innateness and like race and like whatever go away, and very quickly the cultural and social and economic effects emerge, right? It's just like, but of course this guy would never cite that. I mean, it came out after him, but it's just like these people just like, but it's not like that literature didn't exist. I mean, the book Inequality by Design, I'm pretty sure existed when this book came out. So it's irresponsible to not have cited that anyway.
So he closes out the book with part 2 of the Perfect Parent chapter, which I've changed the subtitle. Yes, and I've changed the subtitle to "Distracting You from White Supremacy." He starts with a story about a cop named Loser Lane, which he thinks is funny for exactly the wrong reasons. He says, Loser Lane did in fact succeed. He went to prep school on a scholarship, graduated from Lafayette College in Pennsylvania, and joined the New York Police Department. This was his mother's longtime wish, where he made detective and eventually sergeant. So after a couple of cute anecdotes about names, it starts to get truly insane. He says, Fryer's mission is the study of black underachievement. One could rattle off all the statistics about blacks not doing... God, I cringe every time I say blacks. Blacks not doing so well, he says. You can look at the black-white differential in out-of-wedlock births or infant mortality or life expectancy. Blacks are the worst-performing ethnic group on SATs. Blacks earn less than whites. They are still just not doing well, period. I basically want to figure out where blacks went wrong, and I want to devote my life to this.
Oh, my God.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, where
blacks went wrong. Oh, my God.
I guess if I had to guess, I would say they probably shouldn't have been enslaved by whites. And so obviously that's a personal responsibility thing. If you want to do well, if you want your great-great-grandchildren to do well, then you shouldn't let yourself become a slave.
I will tell you right now where blacks went wrong. They forgot to sell the futures contract on all of their fucking labor.
All right.
So they didn't get into contracts.
That joke's too. That's too soon. Don't get me canceled by proxy. Come on.
I'm just okay. Yeah.
But
this is as we hinted earlier, the chapter about how there are like ethnically colored names, and black people have certain names that they give their kids, and if a black child or a black adult has one of those names, they're less likely to be hired and stuff like that. And one thing that I thought was interesting was that he points out that prior to, I think it was the 70s, black people had mostly the same names as white people, and then possibly due to the like NOI, like Pan-African influence, there started to be more distinctly Black American names.
What evidence does he cite for that?
I don't remember. Probably nothing.
Yeah, because I mean, what? I mean, what? There's always been interracial and interethnic.
Oh, as in like what evidence for the rates, the rates of names being different?
Yeah,
I think he cited evidence for that. I thought you were talking about the why it changed, but yeah, no, I think he did cite something about how common certain names were, like according to like hospitals or something.
But modal commonality is not the same thing as mean and median differences in names, right? You know what I mean? Like if 10% of people, okay, let's say like there are 3 names which are 10%, each have 10% of all groups or names, like whatever that, Matthew, Sarah, and Chris or something. But then like every single other name in the 70% vary on lines or whatever.
You know what? I think he was citing top 10. Top 10 most common.
That's
names.
What I'm saying. That's my point, though. That's modal. That's modal, right? So those top 10 could comprise 50% of names. But then if every single name in the other 50% varied on different lines,
I see.
It would undercut the point, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Because modality is not can't be a judge. It can't be used to judge this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Anyway, that's
but yeah. So yeah, there's not much else to this. It kind of closes suddenly.
It does close very suddenly.
Like he literally he lists popular names and a short little bit about how rich kid names, like names that are the top 10 for rich kids, later become the top 10 for poorer people. And then it just fucking ends.
You know what? And it's interesting that he doesn't. I mean, maybe he doesn't know, or he doesn't cite like one of the first people who actually discussed a similar phenomenon, which was Pierre Bourdieu, which showed how like the cultural tastes of and like the fashions or whatever of the elites, you know, are adopted by working class people, you know, as a way to signal social capital. Then that, you know, from the perspective of rich people, dilutes its validity as a social signal. So then they change. But then what, you know, you also see though in the event of high culture and like hipsters, as we used to call them, which is also the reverse. You see elites establishing cultural capital for themselves, social and linguistic and cultural capital for themselves by cannibalizing from working class and marginalized people. So it's actually very interesting is that there's both of these phenomenon, right? So it's just like this like costly social signaling and social capital and linguistic capital and cultural capital, but like these different processes of like class and race and income in real time. So it's like I don't know. I guess like one would maybe I don't know if this is true, but I think it sort of tracks it would be like the wealthy cannibalized from contemporary working class and poor and black youth culture, while like parents of adults try to like I don't know what the word like the word copy is annoying, but
emulate.
It's just like to use the labels of the cultural elite or whatever. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the point is though is that research that established these things that he's talking about, whatever. It's all about class, and it's all about how class is reproduced on more levels than just economic, and that the social, linguistic, and cultural status, capital, and effects, and their institutional stuff really matter for this question, because they are sort of like they don't matter in the first instance, right? Like they're not why people are poor in the first place, and they're not why whatever, but they are a mechanism by which the system reproduces itself pretty strongly. So it's just I don't know. It's interesting that he just totally elides that.
Should we close it out?
Oh, I sort of assumed that we already had, because that's why.
Okay.
Because we stopped talking about the book, and so everything after now is just sort of like filler, right? I mean,
right.
If you Oh, sorry. I guess I should have said that. I sort of assumed that everything we said after we started talking about the book was like selective inclusion at that point.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we will probably just edit in the interesting philosophical bits we just did, and then we'll probably edit out all the the bits and pieces that just didn't.
Well, you can include the thing about telling Zoomers to kill us. That's fine, but
Yeah. Great way to end out.
That'll be on the Patreon feed, I think. But I just want to close it out because if I do it tomorrow, it'll sound different. So we will reconvene another time to record an episode about super freakonomics because we went a little longer than we thought. So if you enjoyed this, be sure to come back for the super freakonomics episode. Check out our other episodes at neighborsciencepodcast.com or any podcast app. Wow, I had to think of the word podcast. Crazy. Please give us a rating on iTunes so that we can get into charts or whatever. And shit. We're on Twitter at NeighborSciPod, and Yungneocon has also given me a ton of links to also go in the show description. So if you want to know what else to read, then you can just look there. And thanks for listening.
These are all, a lot of these are just straight up disproofs of Levitt and Dubner. Many of them by name. Many of these are explicit academic critiques of him. Like nice. The first 1, 2, 3, 4. I think the first 5 papers I sent mention him by name. The rest are related but not direct. They don't say his name, but they touch on subjects he discusses. That's yeah. I mean, the ones that are my tweets, those are just for you. To be fair, you have to have it. But anyway, yeah. All right. See y'all later.
Bye, listeners.
Wait, which anime are you discussing this time?